Told you on the show, haven't we, how sometimes it's difficult for a brand new monarch, particularly one who's at the very start of his reign. It doesn't matter what decade you look in, even if you look back in the history books, everybody starts off with differing, shall we say, practices, good and bad, whether people like them or dislike them, as the case may be. It's interesting to note, isn't it, with King Charles, everybody basically thinks that he's very soft, too easygoing, and not firm enough with his youngest son, the former royal known as Prince Harry, alongside, of course, the cable TV actress Meghan Markle. What's interesting to note, though, is many people on the other side of the coin feel that he is rather firm and quite stern, in fact. But as ever, let me explain. Neil Sean here in the very heart of Yorkshire, as ever. Nice to have your company today. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're up to, I hope you're all keeping safe and well. This particular story, as ever, is really an ongoing royal story, because if there's one thing that really irks the British public over here, particularly in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure across the Commonwealth, it's the constant use by the ex-royals of their titles. Concededly, they just use them at every single measure. As we've seen in those recent awards that they've picked up, they always like to be introduced as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and that is their right. Let's not forget, could be worse if you looked into the history books. These, of course, were the titles that were conceded to them by, of course, our late and wonderful monarch. But what's interesting here, and more importantly to note, is that when you consider there was a recent revelation, wasn't the fact that Harry and Meghan, if you recall, in that Netflix documentary, decided to drop quite a few bombshells, including how badly mistreated they felt they were, all the while, of course, filming in a rented mansion. It was odd, wasn't it? Because the whole narrative of that documentary was how hard work they'd worked to become successful. And seemingly there were people that were just out to get them, people who were jealous of their success, how well they did on that trip to Africa, that sort of stuff. So realizing that this simply was just one major star within the British monarchy. And that was, of course, our late and wonderful Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, 70 years on the throne, never did anything wrong, and of course was known worldwide simply for being a hard worker and a great ambassador. But as ever, what really happens in these tell-all documentaries is it throws things up, things that you've never heard of or seen of before. And what's interesting here is, in the case of Harry and Meghan, if you remember, Harry openly stated that he apparently offered to, return their titles if it didn't work out after their very first stint in Canada. Now, what's emerged from that is that nobody actually remembers, particularly within the senior royals, that conversation taking place. Titles were never actually brought up at that point, because if you remember, they were simply just taking a year out to see what they wanted to do, define their own path, move forward, that sort of stuff. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because once again, it looks like Harry and Meghan were offering that opportunity so that people would not be offended by the constant use of their titles. In particular, of course, Meghan, when she first launched her book, and she cited herself as Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, but even that couldn't shift it. So moving forward, while the British public over here and across the Commonwealth would like a full removal of those titles, really, that won't come from those two. It will seemingly come from the British Parliament on instruction from the King. Now, whichever way you look at it, right now, King Charles has other things to look at, including his own coronation on May the 6th next year. But I think what will tip the balance will be the constant use of those titles moving forward to that coronation, and how damaging that would be in the long front. As ever, when I know more, you'll know more. Neil Sean in the very heart of Yorkshire.